Are you ready for some smart, plain talk on politics, Israel, and the law? It's the Andrew Parker Show. Let's roll. Welcome to another episode of the Andrew Parker Show, and thank you once again for joining us as we talk each episode, politics, Israel, and the law. And this is episode 488. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for all of those who have been listening for an extended, long period of time, but also the newcomers to the show. And, of course, go to the andrewparkershow.com to subscribe and get everything up to date. Like, leave your email. We'll connect with you, the andrewparkershow.com. We are thrilled to have back with us, I don't know, I think somebody who knows as much in breadth as they do in depth, which is quite a bit both ways, and that is John Hinderaker, president of the American Experiment. You all know about the American Experiment, a unique think tank organization, and more, by the way, and more than just a think tank organization. I think unique across the United States. There are very few that have the impact that the American Experiment does. Go to AmericanExperiment.org. That's AmericanExperiment.org to learn more about the fantastic organization that focuses on good government, that focuses on good, sound public policy, social policy, and really puts its money where its mouth is, because it publishes voraciously policy papers and the like, and has just come out with a new book, Star of the North. You can get it on Amazon, Star of the North, a history of Minnesota, and a unique read, really, on Minnesota, getting much more in depth than you might read in other books. And we need this today more than ever, as our education system is falling apart, and what is real history and what is fictitious, revisionist, political driven history one may not learn. John Hinderaker, welcome to the Andrew Parker Show.
Always great to be with you, Andrew.
So, John, I wanted to start, and we've talked before on the show, and I love having you back because you have, as I say, such a deep but also broad perspective on issues of the day, and boy, do we have issues of the day, and they are difficult ones. Here in Minnesota, I wonder what they'll write 50 years from now, 20 years from now, about what we are seeing in Minnesota as it relates to just blatant, all-out fraud, theft of taxpayer dollars under the nose of the governor, under the nose of the attorney general, and sometimes more than under the nose, directly spoken to both of them at times, and they've ignored it. What's your take?
Well, Andrew, I hope that in 50 years people write that this was the time when voters in Minnesota rose up and changed the direction of the state for the better. The Minnesota fraud scandal, we've been writing about it at American Experiment for a long time, going back to 2017, when the child care fraud was in the news. And subsequently, we've been writing about the Feeding Our Future scandal since January of 2022. So, 4.5 years. And it was a little bit ironic from our standpoint when late last year, for whatever reasons, the Minnesota fraud scandal all of a sudden became page one national.
This is what I've been telling people, that Nick Shirley, as great as he is, and this is not new news. I mean, it may be to the media. Now they're writing about it in more public and broader ways. But yeah, the American experiment's been writing about it for years.
Somalis were being prosecuted for child care fraud back in 2017, and there
Yeah.
have been frauds of various kinds going on since then. Feeding Our Future is the famous one. The FBI raided these outfits in, I think, December of 2021, and then indictments followed. We've been writing about it, as I say, since January of 2022. I think there have been 80 or so people indicted in that scandal. The vast majority of them either have pled guilty or been convicted in one of two jury trials. But the big news in Minnesota fraud, of course, is this whole new round of prosecutions arising out of fraud in various Medicaid programs. And it's not the old-fashioned Medicaid fraud where a doctor's office or a hospital or a clinic would upcharge. They would perform services. They are in the healthcare business, but they would overbill for the services they provided. This is something that's new, and what we have here is organizations that are set up for the sole purpose of defrauding Minnesota's state government. So these are not checks being written to doctors and hospitals. These are checks being written to providers of various kinds, a lot of them nonprofits, some for-profit companies, ostensibly for providing services of a pretty wide variety to indigent people. And what we've learned is that these programs are just riddled with fraud. And the former assistant U.S. attorney who prosecuted all of the Feeding Our Future cases has estimated that of the $18 billion spent in Minnesota in these Medicaid programs over the last 4 or 5 years, at least half was fraudulent. So at least $9 billion on top of $500 million for Feeding Our Future and many more millions in a variety of other frauds.
And John, I understand it that, often these payments were made for services that were never provided whatsoever, and to people who may not exist, or at least not at the clinic.
Yeah. We saw that for sure in Feeding Our Future. I mean, some of these people that were supposedly running food distribution sites would use random name generators, which is something you can find on the internet, to come up with the 2,000 or 5,000 names of children they supposedly were feeding, when the truth was they weren't feeding any, or they were feeding like 12.
Yeah.
And in these Medicare frauds, it's a little bit different, because somewhere in the picture there needs to be somebody who was enrolled in Medicaid. And that person may or may not live in Minnesota, may or may not still be alive, et cetera. But you got to collect names of people who at some point have been enrolled in Medicaid. But as you know, Andrew, when you're dealing with frauds that are centered in the Somali community, that isn't very difficult. Yeah. Because the overwhelming majority of those people are, in fact, on Medicaid. So you've got your population ready-made.
It is ready-made, and we're talking to John Hinderaker, president of the American Experiment. Go to americanexperiment.org, learn more, and donate, because they do some excellent, excellent work. John, turning a little bit to politics, but I want to ask you kind of in an open-ended sort of way, what the connection, relationship, responsibility of Keith Ellison and or Tim Walz has been in this enormous fraud scam.
Well, I think you can say a couple of things. I think Walz in particular was getting a lot of pressure from his constituents, people who are supporters of the DFL party, not to crack down on fraud, not to investigate, not to listen to the whistleblowers who kept trying to point out that all his money is being stolen. And so his effort always was to, tamp it down. Don't let it come to light. And then you have Keith Ellison and Bill Glahn, who, as you know, is a policy fellow here at American Experiment. Mm-hmm. Bill Glahn obtained a tape recording, a 54-minute tape recording of a meeting that Keith Ellison had with a group of people involved in Feeding Our Future, a number of whom were eventually convicted of felonies. And these people met with Ellison, and this was just shortly before the FBI raids blew the whole scandal wide open. It was just a few weeks before the FBI raids. So late in the day, these fraudsters are meeting with Keith Ellison, and they're complaining that the Minnesota Department of Education is a bunch of racists because they're investigating and they're making noises about cutting off the spigot of money that these people are getting. And Keith Ellison is right there with him. You know,
Yeah.
he agrees these agencies are racist, and sometimes he has to make phone calls to straighten them out. He says, quote, "I'm here to help." And
Yeah.
he says, quote, "Let's go fight these guys." These guys being the people who are trying to investigate the frauds.
Yeah.
And he says, Governor
Now they're
Walz,
attacking Nick Shirley. You know,
Oh,
the
yeah,
the
well,
guy who's trying to uncover this.
shoot the messenger. And
Yeah.
at one point, Keith Ellison on tape says, Governor Walz agrees with me that these piddly, stupid things shouldn't interfere with you East African businessmen. Stupid, piddly things being reports of massive amounts of money being stolen by fraudsters. It
Billions.
got so bad, Andrew. There's a whole new concept called fraud tourism. It became notorious in the national criminal underworld that anyone can steal from the state of Minnesota. And so some criminals in Pennsylvania actually came out to Minnesota and set up a nonprofit here for the sole purpose of stealing from
Yeah.
our state government. That's how notorious we became.
The door is open. Come on in. So Keith Ellison, you know, he's got a tough race. This may be the time. It's been over 60 years since a Republican has been Attorney General in the state of Minnesota. You've got to go back to what, Doug Head,
Doug Head.
I believe.
Right.
And, you know, but when we're talking about Democrats to defeat, we're not talking about Warren Spanis here. We're talking about Keith Ellison. And he now has an opponent, a friend of ours for sure, and we know him well. Brilliant and hardworking, would be an excellent attorney general, I think. And that's Ron Schutz. What do you think of that race?
Well, Keith Ellison is running for a third term, and third terms are hard to get. You know, we know that. And of course, he's embroiled in the Feeding Our Future fraud, which is a big factor. Ron Schutz is a very formidable candidate. He's a friend of yours, a friend of mine. Before he left the private practice of law at the end of last year, Ron was literally one of the top lawyers in the United States. I mean, he is a very formidable candidate. He'll be able to raise money, and we'll see. You know, I think in 2022, Jim Schultz ran against Keith Ellison, and he came within, I think, about 50,000 votes, and Keith Ellison significantly underperformed Tim Walz in 2022. Jim Schultz ran, I forget how many points, but 5 points or something ahead of the Republican candidate for governor in that year. So Tim Walz is, of course, out of the race. He'd announced for a third term, then he withdrew under pressure from the National Democratic Party, and currently his approval ratings in Minnesota are absolutely dismal. And so, I think Keith Ellison is in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah, and I don't know. It may help him if he can somehow get a draft from Amy Klobuchar running for governor on the Democratic side. It's going to be on the ticket, which is probably helpful. But, outstate, I don't think he gets votes.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Amy Klobuchar certainly is a stronger candidate than Tim Walz. That's why the National Party pulled Walz. They did a Joe Biden. They pulled Walz out of the race, and they got Amy Klobuchar to come back to Minnesota. But in the most recent polling that I've seen, Amy Klobuchar's disapproval rating was even at 47% approval, 47% disapproval. 2 years ago, she ran against Royce White, a little-known and unfunded Republican candidate. She only got
Right.
56% of the vote. Every time she's run for the Senate, she's gotten fewer votes.
Yeah, it's
So,
interesting.
she's certainly an upgrade over Tim Walz, but I don't know. We'll see how this election turns out.
Let's continue to discuss for a minute here the Democratic Party, and we'll get to the Republicans. But um, we just had primary election. We're in the primary election season, and we just had some elections out east in New England, in particular in New York. And the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, that have taken, have had a stranglehold over the city of Minneapolis, although in the last election it loosened a little bit, but only a little bit, and have all but ruined the city of Minneapolis from what I grew up in and from what we all knew, the DSA. They now, through Zoran Mandani, as well as others, have expanded and won some primaries against the establishment Democratic Party that we all grew up with. It is no longer that party. And is there a way to turn back from the DSA, in your judgment, starting with New England?
Well, you look at the poll data as well as the primary results, and it's pretty obvious that socialism is where the heart of the Democratic Party is at. I mean, that's the wave, that's the trend, that's who's winning. And you see it in the polls as well. A large majority of Democrats now have a favorable view of socialism, significantly more than those that have a favorable view of free enterprise. So this is a very radical departure from anything that we've seen before in American history. One of the ones that won that primary the other day, what's her name? Chevalier?
Yeah,
How do you
Chevalier.
pronounce it?
Yeah.
Chevalier, who describes herself as a communist and says she hates America.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't that many years ago when if you were a communist who hated America, you at least would keep it to yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a badge of honor. What do you mean?
Now, it's her platform. So
Yeah.
it's an unbelievable change in our political life. I don't see that wave ebbing inside the Democratic Party unless there are just overwhelming electoral defeats where the Democratic Party just gets thrashed and that radical element gets discredited. But unfortunately, so far, there's really no sign of that happening. The Democrats have done well in the 2025 and 2026 elections, generally speaking. They'll probably do well in the midterms this year, reasonably well at least. And so I think we're going to see that trend for the foreseeable future continue.
It is extremely dangerous. Chevalier, what's the guy's first name? Barry, or I don't know. Lander.
Oh, that's a
Lander,
guy.
Mark.
I called it a woman. You're right. It's a guy.
Well, no, you were right. Chevalier is a woman, but Mark, I think it's Mark Lander, beat Dan Goldman handily, and he was the incumbent. And the platform fight was, do you support Israel, or are you opposed to a Jewish state anywhere in the world? And that's what carried the day. So Lander is in there, Chevalier, and one other who was kind of a surprise winner, but this woman who supports Hamas over Israel publicly and proudly, and that issue in the second largest populated region in the world, that is New York City, of Jews are voting this way consistently.
Well, it's not only New York, too. We've seen this around the country. I mean, Graham Plattner, let's not forget him.
Yeah,
He's going to be the Democratic nominee for the Senate in Maine. And we didn't used to think of Maine as a hardcore left-wing radical state. But here's a guy who has described himself as a communist, who is pretty openly anti-Semitic, among many other character flaws,
Yeah.
And the first thing, it's kind of ironic, Andrew, isn't it? That, I mean, there was a time when the fact about Graham Plattner that was by far the most widely known thing about him was that he had a Nazi tattoo.
Yeah.
And that was the time during which he was soaring to the top in the polls in the Democratic Party.
It used to be a disqualifier. Now it is a flag that you should wave. And
But it really is amazing because Dan Goldman, the incumbent who lost the primary, as you said, is just a vicious critic of President Trump. You couldn't ask for a more hardcore partisan Democrat. His only fault in the eyes of Democratic primary voters is that he doesn't hate Israel.
Yeah.
He's not anti-Zionist, which is basically, that basically means anti-Jew.
Yeah, it is in particular because they do not want to allow the Jewish people their ancestral homeland. They want to destroy it based on untruths and dishonesty. So the socialist movement across this country has, in my judgment, now has a beachhead, and they are going to expand it. They have a foundation, and they're going to hold those spots and expand it. And they're going to have a real voice in the halls of Congress. It is absolutely amazing. And they will probably launch presidential candidates soon enough.
Andrew, I've written about this on Powerline, and I sort of came of age politically in an era where the flashpoint, the big conflict between Republicans and Democrats was over marginal income tax rates. And the Republicans thought they should be like 28%, and the Democrats thought it should be like 37%, for a top rate. Well, that is a disagreement that can be negotiated and compromised. But if you have one party that wants American free enterprise, the system that we have always had, and another party that wants socialism, I don't know how you negotiate that. I don't know what the compromise is. Those are two fundamentally different economic and actually political systems. And you can't have socialism in New York and free enterprise in Texas. That doesn't work. So, we are in the process of sorting ourselves into red states and blue states.
Yeah.
And the red states, generally speaking, are getting redder, and the blue states, I think without exception, are getting bluer. And people are sorting themselves. Millions of people are leaving blue states and moving to red states. Maybe a few are moving the other way, but not many. And I think we are moving toward a fundamental conflict in what people want our country to be. And I'm not sure that conflict is going to turn out to be reconcilable.
Well, I think, I've talked about this a number of times on the show, that it is not just our politics, but it is everything we do. It is the shops that we go to and frequent. Are they blue or are they red? The state that we live in, as you mentioned, is it blue? Is it red? The job that we take or that we seek or that we leave, is it blue or is it red? That becomes the foundational question people start asking, as opposed to, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have wonderful weather all year long? I'm moving to California. No, it's just not happening. So I tell you, I am in complete agreement with you. I've been talking about it for quite some time, and it is a civil war without bullets. It's a separation without bullets, but the fighting certainly does continue.
And Andrew, it won't lead to civil war, but it could lead to disunion. I mean, we are on a path. What's the end of that path? The end of that path is two different countries, a separation between red America and blue America. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying that's the direction we're moving, and something's got to change.
Well, it certainly does, and it appears to be a path, would you agree, that Europe was on decades ago, and look at them now. Are we on this socialist sort of agenda that the Europeans took on?
Well, some of us are, but again, when you talk about our union, I can envision a situation where the Democrats get 51% control over the levers of power in Washington, D.C., and they enact certain legislation, maybe confiscate everybody's firearms or whatever it might be. And you can imagine a state like Texas saying no.
Yeah.
No, we do not. You pack the Supreme Court to add 5 more or 6 more justices, to negate the Second Amendment, and you got a 2-vote margin in the Senate and a 4-vote margin in the House, and now you're trying to take away our rights. We don't regard that as legitimate.
Add in Puerto Rico and D.C. and
a couple of new states,
a few new states.
And I think there are red states that simply would not. They wouldn't say, "Oh, okay, you win."
Right. No, certainly they wouldn't. But I do think people are already starting to, as you pointed out, separate themselves out. And it just appears to me that this socialist movement, wherever they take hold, are turning us toward Europe and not based on a history of the United States and the bold innovators that we have always been in the world. In fact, the opposite of it. Let's turn our attention for a minute to Iran and the Republican handling of foreign policy. I talk about it every day. The mullahs remain, John, and billions are being given to them in their position of control in Iran. Ballistic missiles are kept. We aren't affecting their proxies one way or another. Nukes, well, we'll see about nukes. We don't know yet how that's going to, that one we'll figure out down the road. The only good, if the Republicans win the midterms and somehow we're able to defeat Iran later, go back in militarily and defeat them later. But it sure doesn't seem like this deal makes sense if that really is a part of the picture, because why would you give or allow for the release of billions or the earning of billions through oil sales by the Iranians if you were intending to go back in? What do you think of this deal, and what do you think Donald Trump has up his sleeve?
Well, I don't think I've ever seen defeat snatched from the jaws of victory.
Why are you using these lines? I love them.
The way we've seen it here. I mean, we had this brilliant military campaign. We wiped out Iran's leadership.
Yeah.
We killed the Ayatollah. We wiped out the leadership of the IRGC. We devastated their military forces. At that point, we should have quit and gone home. The only thing you can really do with military force is destroy things.
Yeah.
And our goal was to set back Iran's military as well as its nuclear program so that for a certain number of years until it rebuilds or until there's regime change, it's not going to be able to threaten us or our allies. That was the goal. That goal was achieved with the military bombardment. And I am at a loss to understand why President Trump ever thought that there was any merit in seeking any kind of a deal.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you say, I want a deal, you have transferred power over to the Iranian regime. You have put them in the driver's seat because all they have to do is say no. And it was a foolish venture from the very beginning to even try to reach a deal with these people.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Are you a business owner? Are you losing sleep because you feel your partner isn't carrying their weight, or because you no longer share the same vision or values? Are you no longer comfortable going into your own office? are you walking on eggshells in the company you built? This is Chris Daniels, founding partner of Parker Daniels Keyboard LLC, a premier litigation law firm headquartered in downtown Minneapolis. For more than 30 years, I've specialized in business litigation and have helped hundreds of business owners resolve troubling business disputes. As a former certified public accountant, I get to the heart of the dispute, including financial issues. Business divorce can be messy, time-consuming, and costly, but doing nothing can cost you a lot more. Not just money, but emotionally, physically, and in your personal life. If you and your business partner no longer see eye to eye and you're eager to take a proactive approach and make a change, please call me at 612-355-4100 and schedule a consultation. Or visit our website at www.parkerdk.com.
And it's gone from bad to worse. And now we've got this situation where apparently I have it on very, very good authority that the guy who's really driving this desire for any deal, no matter what it is J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, yeah.
And we've got this absurd situation where we're chasing after the Iranians, trying to offer them more and more so that they will open up the Strait of Hormuz, which was already open before we started bombing. I mean, it's unbelievable how poorly this situation has been.
John, what I have said on the show is kind of tongue in cheek, but I think J.D. Vance is 41 years old. Something like that, 42. He wasn't even alive when the mullahs took over Iran and created this murderous regime.
It took our embassy.
Yeah,
and held Americans hostage for more than a year.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't even alive. He thinks that he can negotiate with these. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a regime that is hell-bent on apocalyptic ideas, and they have not changed. They will never change, and that is one thing we know for sure. And to give them billions of dollars, and it's why many in the pro-Israel community are so up in arms, because who does this? Who's really the ones who are going to suffer from this? It is going to be the Iranian people and the state of Israel. It's not going to be United States citizens getting bombed by ballistic missiles anytime soon. And maybe, and Trump saying, I'm America first, and therefore it's not my problem what happens with Israel. Well, if you want to have ongoing war and conflict and no homeland for the Palestinian people, this is the way to do it, because that is not going to happen.
Well, as you know, Andrew, virtually all of the violence and disorder in the Middle East can be traced back to Iran. It is Iran that Hamas is just Iran. That's all it is an Iranian. Hezbollah is just Iran, another Iranian puppet. The Houthis, they're just Iran. That's where they get their money. That's where they get their munitions. That's where they get their inspiration. And so it is the Iranian regime that is responsible for violence, disorder, war in the Middle East. Now, I've never heard an American president, go back as far as you want, go back to Reagan, I've never heard an American president say that peace in the Middle East is not in our national security interest. President after president has tried to help bring about peace in the Middle East, not as a favor to Israel or anyone else, but because everyone has recognized that that would be in our national interest. And here we have an opportunity by disabling Iran, by devastating their military might, by setting them back economically, to stop them from effectively supporting these proxies, particularly if we instead of trying to block Israel from doing battle against Hamas and Hezbollah, if we say, go ahead, wipe them out.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I don't care what perspective you adopt. I'm as America first as the next guy.
Yeah.
But when the Iranians chant, what do they chant? They chant death to America.
Yeah.
And they say Israel's the little Satan, but who's the great Satan? We're the great Satan. Where do they really want to blow up those bombs? Tel Aviv, sure, but who's next in line? New York and Washington, D.C.?
And do you want something tangible today? Well, How about the world economy? How about the economic impacts on America, not Israel or anyone else, on America in the Straits of Hormuz? Do we need Iran to be able to hold the world hostage by having control? Those mullahs should be out, destroyed, and allow the Iranian people to elect because whoever is in control of that area, we need to be a player of the Council of Nations with the Council of Nations in the world and not an enemy of it. It's too important an area to have Iran have the sort of geographic control over it.
Well, what we really want in Iran, obviously, is regime change. And there was a shining moment there when it looked like we might get it. But, you know, these brutal tyrannies can stay in
Did you say
power.
regime change? That, John, you cannot say that.
Oh,
If
yes.
you say that,
Oh,
boy,
yes,
you're...
I can. You know, these brutal tyrannies can stay in power long after they're dead men walking, long after they've lost virtually all the support of their populations. You look at Cuba, you look at Venezuela, you look at the countries of Eastern Europe. I mean, long after they've lost any credibility or public support, they can remain in power as long as they command soldiers who are willing to shoot unarmed civilians. And as long as that's true, they can stay in power. That's why Raul Castro is in power in Cuba at age 94 or whatever the heck he is. And we saw, I think it was in January, February, when was it, that the Iranian people really rose up.
Yeah, in January.
And the regime murdered something like 45,000 of them. So we know that at this point, the mullahs can command, the IRGC can command the army, and they will shoot civilians. And that means that unless we send in ground forces, the IRGC is going to remain in power. Well, if it was up to me, Andrew, I would talk very seriously to our generals about what that would entail, about what it would cost in human life, about how that would go, and I would seriously consider using American forces to overthrow that regime, which is inimical to our interests. But politically, that's not going to happen. No. And so the best we can do, I think, is to periodically devastate Iran's military and set back their economy to weaken them as much as possible.
And make sure that they do not hold the world economy hostage, because they are in a position to do it if they decide to do it. Just by their geography and what we've seen over the last several months. And that is an America First policy and nothing but. Turning to the National Republican Party, Donald Trump is not going to be running for president in 2028. It sure looks like he has sided with J.D. Vance and his ideas over certain important policies. I think he also has great respect for Marco Rubio. But where do you think the Republican Party is headed? Is establishment Republicans of eras gone by finished? Is it on a potential future ascendancy? Is the populist movement of America First, MAGA, really in the driver's seat for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think that for the foreseeable future, the Republican Party is the party of the working class, the party of the middle class, the party of rural America, and with also some support, particularly from small business. Not so much big business, but a lot of support from small business. The Democratic Party is the party of the wealthy. It's the party of the college-educated, people who don't make much money. That's a big part of what's going on in places like New York City. People who think they're smart, but unfortunately they're not making much money, and that radicalizes them. And they'll continue to a great extent, but a diminishing extent, to be the party of ethnic minorities and so forth. That's a change that we've seen developing over the last, 20 years, and that's not fundamentally going to change. Every president puts together his own unique winning coalition. You know, the Republican coalition that elected George W. Bush was not the same as the coalition that elected Ronald Reagan, and it certainly was not the same as the coalition that elected Donald Trump. And the next candidate for president on the Republican side is going to put together a little bit different coalition of supporters. He's not going to be Donald Trump too. You know, he's going to be his own candidate with his own base of support. But I think in broad terms, for the foreseeable future, yeah, the Republican Party is the party of small business, the middle class, the working class, rural America.
You know, I wonder whether you can put together a winning coalition with that. I think you can, with the Electoral College in mind. I think you can still, but it is a battle, and it's becoming a more difficult battle as two things arise. Number one, immigration problems and who votes has become a real issue. Who has the ballot, as it were? And in some of these states, it can be the difference. Look at Arizona.
Well, you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, election integrity is a big issue. Immigration, obviously, is a huge issue. But there's a reason why the Democrats have changed their tune on immigration. You know, if you look back historically, people like Cesar Chavez and
Sure.
Barbara Jordan, people like that, even as late as Barack Obama, you know, denouncing illegal immigration and talking about how it drives down the wages of working class Americans and so on. They're absolutely right about that. And they have done a 180. They've changed their tune. Why is that? I think the reason is because they know that the clock is ticking and time is not on their side. The Democrats, the liberals, have an enormous demographic problem because conservatives have many more children than liberals do. And that's just it's an amazing correlation. And you know, Andrew, I mean, it's stunning when you look at the numbers. Conservatives are having children like people used to when I was growing up, you know. Liberals have kind of stopped having children. And they know that is a huge problem for them. So they're trying to make up for that demographic deficit by importing voters. Now, how that's going to work for them, I mean, it's really, really hard to say. You know, they're looking ahead to the next generation where whether the immigrants are legal or illegal, the next generation is going to be voting. And I think that's what they're planning for.
You know, I'm very concerned. I want to talk about one more issue with you, John. I'm very concerned about that wonderful time in the morning where you're up, you have breakfast with your kids, you take them to the bus stop, and off they go. Where? To that public school, or even sometimes that private or charter school. And all day long, they're away from you. And you don't have the control over what they're learning, what they're seeing, what they're reading. And as it turns out, what our kids are being educated on is dangerous. I mean, it is a complete shift and a change. I remember back when my son was in high school and he was reading his history book, and I took a look at it. And, you know, this was just a small issue because this was more than a decade ago. It made Jimmy Carter look like the second coming, and it made Ronald Reagan look like Satan. I mean, that's how history was written then. I could only hope for that history book today, because today it is far, far worse. What can we do about our education policy? We are losing generations.
Andrew, this is an existential threat to our country. As you know, American Experiment has done a ton of work on education for many years. It's one of our most important fields of not only study but activism. And let's focus on Minnesota. I think we're pretty typical of what's happening around the country.
We used to be a leader in good education.
Yeah, we used to be. We're not anymore. Our
No.
schools are now terrible. But there's two issues here. One is competence, okay? The quality of the education, just as objectively measured, has gone badly downhill. So in Minnesota, which used to have the reputation of having good public schools, more than half of our K through 12 students can neither read nor do math at grade level. More than half. And that's just, that's unacceptable competence in the public schools. In states like Mississippi, whose schools we used to look down on with scorn, are now significantly outperforming Minnesota's schools. So competence is a huge problem. But the second problem is the transition from education to indoctrination. And in Minnesota, the Department of Education under Governor Tim Walz has explicitly said that they are moving away from teaching content, facts, information, and rather focusing on teaching activism. And so if you look at the social studies standards that they're now using in K through 12 education, which we fought against bitterly and actually got some changes made in, and if you look at the ethnic studies strand, which they have now mandated be included in every course. Every course. So if you're a geometry teacher, you are by law supposed to figure out how to talk about race and how to talk about the evils of America, and by the way, the evils of Israel.
Oh, yeah.
In your geometry class, right? This is now mandated in Minnesota law. So we have these two issues. One, that the instruction is just incompetent, and two, that the focus has shifted away from teaching content, teaching information, teaching facts, to trying to develop our kids into left-wing activists. And people listening to this might think, oh, that can't be true. That's got to be an exaggeration. I wish it were.
Yeah.
We've put out a number of videos on this, which you can easily find on our YouTube channel. The content of the curricula that are being used now, for example, with this ethnic studies education strand, I mean, it's just shocking. It's absolutely shocking.
It is. I have followed over the past several years the social studies directives that come down. I don't think they do it every year, but they do it occasionally. And it has now shrunk, for example, the discussion of the Jewish people and particularly the Holocaust down to less than a paragraph. And, you know, we've got pages and pages down to less than a paragraph. And is it a wonder that anti-Semitism has gone through the roof? And people now, I mean, most of those survivors are passing away. There are very few left in the world of Holocaust survivors who, or eyewitnesses to what happened. Just in a decade or two, it will not exist any longer. And so relying on what we do know, what we can teach, but we're not doing that. We're doing the exact opposite. John, tell us, focusing now more on Minnesota, tell us about the book that the American Experiment has just come out with on Minnesota history. I understand it is fascinating. It is content-based with the facts. Star of the North.
So coming into 2026, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, late last year, we at American Experiment looked around and we realized that the Tim Walz administration here in Minnesota wasn't going to do anything to celebrate our 250th anniversary. They don't like it. They're opposed to it. So we just took upon ourselves the responsibility for a variety of programs and events over the course of the year to celebrate America's 250th anniversary.
Beautiful.
And one of the things that we've done is we published this book. And to back up just for a moment, our senior economist is John Phelan. You probably know John. He's British by birth. He has an advanced degree from the London School of Economics, and he was working as an economist in the private sector in London. He married a woman from Minnesota who was living in London at the time, and they were married for a while. They decided to have some kids, and they decided to come back to Minnesota to do that. So for the first time in his life, John Phelan came to Minnesota to go to work for Center of the American Experiment as an economist. He's done a wonderful, wonderful job for us. Well, when he got here to Minnesota, he's kind of a history buff, knows a lot about English history, and he got interested in Minnesota history. And one day now, some years ago, he came to me and he said, I'd like to write an article in our magazine, Thinking Minnesota, our quarterly magazine, about, I forget what it was, but some aspect of Minnesota history that I've been reading up on. What do you think about that? Would you be in favor of doing that? And I said, I think that's a great idea. So he did, and ever since, John has been writing essays on various aspects of Minnesota history in our magazine, Thinking Minnesota. And so we had the idea, in commemoration of the 250th anniversary, how about if we collect all those essays? John writes a couple of more to fill in a couple of chronological gaps in the narratives, and expand some where he had to cut them to fit the magazine space limitations, and publish it as a book. And we've done that. And it's now out as of about 2 weeks ago. It's available on Amazon. It's called Star of the North. And
there you see it. Beautiful.
It's a beautiful hardcover book. That's the Battle of Nashville, a detail from a painting on the cover there. And it's a fair, objective, but positive, history of our state. Just like if you're going to write a history of the United States, it should be mostly positive. Our history deserves to be celebrated. One of the things that we're going to try to do, we got to figure out the logistics here, but we're going to try to place this book in every high school library and every public library in the state of Minnesota, which they're adding them together, a little over 600, I believe. And my dream, Andrew, is that, somewhere a 16-year-old boy maybe is in the school library and he sees this book.
Yeah.
And he thinks it looks kind of cool, Star of the North, battle scene. What's that all about? And he picks it up. Because I think that people, including young people, who pick up this book and start to read it are going to find it very interesting. So you can go to Amazon, just search for Star of the North. It's $13.50. It's priced at cost. We don't make a nickel on it. And what we found is that the reception has been great. People think this is really a cool idea. People are interested in reading the book. We're on the summer tour now. The summer tour is about Minnesota fraud. We've done 2 of the 20 events that we have scheduled. The first event was night before last in Maple Grove. We had 200 people at that event.
Fabulous.
Yeah, we're drawing great crowds. And Jill Sandiger, our event coordinator, brought along 25 copies of the book.
Yeah.
Thinking, well, maybe a few people might want to buy it. And so at the end of the event, we have a T-shirt that we're selling and the book. And I explained the book and how it came to be. And I said, we have some copies if you'd like to pick one up, $13.50. Well, we sold out the 25 copies, and we could have sold a lot more.
Sure.
We had an event in Buffalo yesterday, and I said, I'm sorry, we don't have any copies on hand right now. But you can go on Amazon and you can buy the book. And today we got 500 copies delivered to our office.
Fabulous.
So if any of our listeners attend one of our summer tour events on Minnesota fraud, you can buy a book there. You can go to Amazon and buy it. It's going to be available, in a variety of ways. But one of the things we really want to do is to try to get this book in the hands of people, especially young people, so that they hear the truth about the history of our state.
Well, if we can get a Department of Education in the state of Minnesota that has an understanding or a caring for truth and facts, we would have that book in each school across the state. And maybe that'll happen. We've got elections. We can kind of create the community that we want. John Hinderaker, president of the American Experiment, thank you so much for joining us on the Andrew Parker Show. Go out and get Star of the North. Go to Amazon, pick it up, $13.50. One of the best historical reference books on Minnesota and some great essays about the history of Minnesota. John, before we leave, I know you've got a fall briefing coming up after the summer festivities. Why don't you mention what's going on there? And I think the book might be available there, too.
Yeah, we do a lot of events, as you know, Andrew. Last year we did 56 live events. We'll probably do a similar number in 2026. The fall briefing, I think it's September 19th is the date. It's on our website. I think it's my birthday, September 19th.
Woohoo!
Byron York is going to be the speaker. So it's going to be in the
fabulous.
lead up to the it's going to be in the lead up to the midterm elections. Byron, of course, one of the great national authorities, very interesting guy, a friend of mine. And so the program is going to be about kind of a preview of how things are going and the upcoming elections. And everybody that buys a ticket to the fall briefing, which is a fundraiser, everybody that buys a ticket to the fall briefing will get a copy of Star of the North.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's reason enough. So September 19th, watch for it. Go to AmericanExperiment.org. Go to AmericanExperiment.org to learn about all of the programming, the writings of the American Experiment, including the fall briefing that we believe is September 19th with Byron York. John, thanks so much once again for joining us on the Andrew Parker Show. And I'm going to connect with, Catherine Kirsten, about, she's the education writer. And I want to talk to her. Yeah, she's a good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to.
You want to talk about what's happening in education in Minnesota? Kathy's a great resource. Katrin Wigfall has been with us now for, I think, 9 years, full-time policy fellow. We have a third policy fellow in education. Josiah Padley just joined us within the last 6 months, so it's a big area of focus.
Oh, great. All right, well, we're going to have a couple of shows on that. I just think it's so important. John, thanks again for joining us. Everyone out there, thanks for listening. And I'll tell you, go to the AndrewParkerShow.com. You know, it's often, well, it's sometimes referred to as an award-winning website. And you'll learn a lot about things you want to know. And you can subscribe, leave us your email, and we will connect with you. Until next time, be kind to your neighbor. For more Smart Plain Talk, go to theandrewparkershow.com. Learn about all of your listening and viewing options. And remember, all the great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope. This episode of The Andrew Parker Show is sponsored by Parker Daniels Keyboard. Mark Twain once quipped, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. When you are lied about and it spreads, the resulting mayhem and destruction can be, and often is, disastrous." Hi, this is Andrew Parker, co-founder of the Parker Daniels Keyboard Law Firm. I recently handled a high-profile defamation lawsuit on behalf of a luxury home real estate agent whose business was decimated by falsehoods spread about him. After nearly 2 years of litigation and 2 weeks of trial, the jury came back with a verdict of more than $2 million for our client. Parker Daniels Keyboard. We litigate cases, we try cases, and we win cases. With a record of excellence in achieving extraordinary results, Parker Daniels Keyboard lawyers have consistently won huge verdicts for its clients in the areas of defamation, civil rights violations, regulatory battles, and intellectual property theft. For wise counsel and winning results, contact us at Parker Daniels Keyboard, premier law firm in downtown Minneapolis.